The ultrasound photo felt cool and slick in my hand, a small black and white window into a world that was about to become my everything. I had stared at it for the entire 20-minute drive home from the hospital, tracing the tiny, flickering shape of our baby, our 6-week-old secret. My heart hammered against my ribs, a joyful, frantic drumbeat of anticipation. Tonight, tonight, I would finally tell him. I pictured Mark's face, the way his eyes would widen, the slow dawning smile that always started in the corner of his mouth before spreading across his entire face. He was going to be a father. We were going to be a family. I practically floated up the front steps of our small craftsman bungalow, the one we'd poured all our savings into, the one with the crooked porch swing and the rose bushes I'd babied all summer. The house was quiet, which was good. It meant his mother, Eleanor, was out for her weekly bridge club meeting. The air in our home had grown so heavy since she'd moved in 3 months ago, but tonight, just for a little while, it felt light again. It felt like ours. I headed straight for the small spare room at the end of the hall, our nursery. It was my favorite place in the house, a canvas of all our future hopes. We'd spent the last month painting the walls a soft, buttery yellow. Mark had assembled the crib himself, his brow furrowed in concentration as he fumbled with the tiny screws. And I had laughed, my hand already resting on my still flat stomach. The mobile I'd ordered, a delicate collection of hand-felted stars and a smiling moon, was set to arrive tomorrow. I had the perfect spot for it, right above the spot where our baby would sleep. I pushed the door open, a smile already on my lips, ready to imagine where we'd place the rocking chair, where the bookshelf would go. But the smile died before it could fully form. My breath caught in my throat, a sharp, painful gasp. The room was empty, not just unfinished. Empty. The buttery yellow walls were bare. The crib Mark had so painstakingly built was gone. The small antique dresser we'd found at a flea market last spring had vanished. Even the rug, a plush, cream-colored circle I'd picked out just last week, had been pulled from the floor. The room was a hollow, echoing shell. It was as if our dream had been scrubbed clean from the walls, leaving behind nothing but the faint scent of lemon-scented cleaner. My mind refused to process it. A mistake? A prank? My gaze swept the barren room, searching for an explanation, for any sign that this was a joke. And then I saw it. A single white envelope lying in the center of the dusty hardwood floor where the crib used to be. My name, Chloe, was written on the front in Mark's neat architectural script. My hands trembled as I knelt to pick it up. The paper felt cold, foreign. I tore it open, my heart pounding a sick, slow rhythm against my ribs. The note inside was short, brutally so, just 2 lines. I can't do this. I've sold everything and paid off my debts. It's better this way. Don't try to find me. The words didn't make sense. Sold everything? Debts? We didn't have any debts, not any that I knew of. I read it again, and then a third time, as if the letters might rearrange themselves into something I could understand. But they remained cold, sharp, and final. The ultrasound photo slipped from my other hand, fluttering to the floor beside the cruel white note. I stared at the 2 pieces of paper, one holding the beginning of a life, the other marking the end of one. The room started to spin. My knees buckled, and I sank to the floor, the hollow sound of my own sob echoing in the empty, silent space that was supposed to have been our future. It hadn't always been like this. A life dismantled and packed away into nothing. Before the silence, before the empty room, there was laughter. There was the day we met, a ridiculously cliché scene at a downtown coffee shop where he'd spilled a latte all over my sketchbook. He was so mortified, his cheeks flushing a deep red as he stammered apologies and insisted on buying me a new one, plus dinner. I remember looking into his warm, apologetic brown eyes and thinking, this one is different. And he was. Brown eyes. And Mark was the kind of man who noticed small things. The way I tucked my hair behind my ear when I was nervous, my favorite author, the fact that I hated cilantro. He was an architect, but he saw the world less in blueprints and more in stories. He'd listen for hours as I talked about my work at the city archive, fascinated by the forgotten histories I uncovered. He made me feel seen, not just looked at. We were married within a year, a simple ceremony in a garden blooming with late summer roses. Our life was modest but full. We took long weekend drives up the coast, cooked elaborate dinners in our tiny kitchen, and fell asleep talking about the children we'd have someday. He wanted a boy first, I wanted a girl. It was a sweet, recurring debate that felt like a promise. Life was a comfortable, beautiful rhythm we had built together, just the two of us. Then, 3 months ago, the rhythm broke. His mother, Eleanor, was forced to sell her sprawling suburban home after a bad investment wiped out her savings. It's just for a little while, Chloe, Mark had pleaded, his face etched with worry. She just needs a place to land until she gets back on her feet. I'd agreed, of course. How could I not? She was his mother. But from the moment Eleanor walked through our door, her designer luggage in tow, the air in our home shifted. It grew colder, heavier, charged with a judgment I couldn't quite name, but felt in my bones. Eleanor was a woman carved from ice and disapproval. She never raised her voice, never said a cruel word directly. Her weapon was suggestion, wielded with surgical precision. "Oh, you're serving pasta again? I just worry Mark isn't getting enough protein for his long hours," she'd say with a thin smile. Or, "That dress is certainly bold, dear." In my day, we aimed for elegance. She rearranged my bookshelves, replaced my favorite coffee with a bitter, expensive brand she preferred, and constantly tidied my desk at the archive, a place she once referred to as that dusty little hobby of yours. At first, Mark defended me. "Mom, that's Chloe's favorite mug," he'd say gently. "Please, leave her things alone." But Eleanor was relentless. She'd pull him aside for long, whispered conversations in the living room after I'd gone to bed. I couldn't hear the words, but I could feel their effect. Slowly, Mark began to change. He'd come home from work quiet and distant. He started siding with her in small, almost imperceptible ways. "You know, Mom has a point, Chloe. Maybe we should eat out less. We need to be more careful with money." When I'd ask what he meant, he'd just shake his head. "It's nothing, just stress." But it wasn't nothing. It was the slow, steady erosion of us. The man who once celebrated my passions now looked at me with a stranger's eyes, eyes that seemed to be measuring my worth and finding it lacking. The final straw came a week before he left. I found a credit card statement hidden in his desk drawer. It was maxed out. Thousands of dollars in charges I didn't recognize. Payments to an LLC I'd never heard of. High-end restaurants. A stay at a boutique hotel downtown. When I confronted him, he shut down completely. "It's my business, Chloe. It's complicated. Please, just trust me." But the trust was already gone, replaced by a cold knot of fear in my stomach. I didn't know who he was anymore. I didn't know who we were. And as I sat on the floor of our empty nursery, I realized I'd been grieving our marriage long before he'd bothered to write the note. The drive to Sarah's apartment was a blur. I don't remember the traffic or the route, only the feeling of the steering wheel slick beneath my sweaty palms and the ultrasound photo on the passenger seat, a fragile testament to a dream that had dissolved into a nightmare. Sarah was my best friend from college, the kind of friend who didn't need explanations. The second she opened her door and saw my face, pale, tear-streaked, and utterly broken, she just pulled me into her arms, pale, I collapsed against her, the sobs I'd been holding back finally breaking free in her quiet hallway. She led me to her couch, wrapped me in a thick, soft blanket, and handed me a mug of tea I couldn't drink. She didn't press for details, not at first. She just sat with me, a silent, steady anchor in the swirling chaos of my mind. "He's gone," I finally managed to whisper, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "He took everything. The nursery. It's empty, Sarah." Her expression hardened, the sympathy in her eyes sharpening into a protective fury. "What do you mean, gone?" I handed her the note. She read it, her lips tightening into a thin, angry line. "Paid off his debts? What debts? You guys were fine. You just put that down payment on the house." I shook my head, fresh tears welling. "I don't know. He's been different for months, ever since his mother moved in. Quiet, secretive. He kept saying it was work stress, but..." My voice trailed off as a memory surfaced, sharp and sudden. The credit card statement, the one I'd found in his desk. I need to go back, I said, my voice suddenly firm. I have to get my things, my laptop, my files from the archive, and the statement. I had to get that statement. Sarah nodded, her jaw set. Okay, but I'm going with you. You are not going back into that house alone. The thought of returning to that hollowed-out space made my stomach clench, but she was right. I couldn't leave my life behind, not all of it. An hour later, we were standing on my front porch. The key still worked. A small, cruel irony. The house felt alien, stripped of the warmth and life that had once filled it. Most of my personal belongings were still there. My books, my clothes, the little ceramic birds on the mantelpiece, but all the valuable items, the things that could be sold quickly, were gone. The TV, the new sound system, even the antique mirror in the hallway that had been a wedding gift from my grandmother. He had been systematic, efficient. It was a liquidation, not a departure. While Sarah helped me pack a suitcase with my clothes and toiletries, I went straight to Mark's office. The room was mostly untouched, his architectural drafts still rolled up in a corner. I opened the desk drawer where I'd seen the statement. It was still there, tucked beneath a stack of invoices. I pulled it out, my hands shaking. The charges were even worse than I remembered. But it wasn't just the amount that made my blood run cold. It was the name of the LLC the payments had been made to. Vance Development Group. The name meant nothing to me, but as I stuffed the paper into my bag, my eyes caught something else. A small leather-bound journal, half hidden under a pile of blueprints. It was Mark's private journal, the one he'd kept since college. He'd never let me read it, said it was just for his thoughts and sketches. My fingers hovered over it. It felt like a violation, but he had already violated everything we had. I took it. Whatever secrets he was keeping, I had a right to know. I was carrying his child into a world he had just tried to burn to the ground. The first few days at Sarah's were a fog of sleeplessness and nausea. The morning sickness was relentless now, a constant physical reminder of the baby growing inside me, while the world I had built for it had been torn apart. I avoided my phone, letting the calls from my worried parents go to voicemail. How could I even begin to explain that my husband had vanished, leaving me pregnant and alone, with nothing but a cruel note and a mountain of questions? Sarah was my rock. She made me toast, refilled my water bottle, and sat with me in silence when the words wouldn't come. She never once said, "I told you so," even though she had never trusted Eleanor. On the third day, Mark finally called. I saw his name flash on the screen, and my heart leaped into my throat, a confusing mix of terror and a desperate, stupid flicker of hope. Maybe it was all a misunderstanding. Maybe he'd come to his senses. Sarah saw my hesitation and squeezed my hand. To his senses. You don't have to answer that, Chloe. But I did. I needed to hear his voice. I needed to hear him try to justify the wreckage he'd left behind. I swiped to answer, my hand trembling. Chloe? His voice was flat, distant, as if he were calling a stranger about a misplaced package. There was no warmth, no remorse. Mark, I said, my own voice barely a whisper. Where are you? That's not important, he said coolly. I'm calling to make sure you understand. It's over. I've started a new life. This is a clean break. A clean break. The words were so clinical, so detached. It was like he was closing a business deal, not ending a marriage. The hope in my chest curdled into a cold, hard knot of anger. A clean break? You emptied our home, Mark. You sold the crib. You left me a 2-sentence note and disappeared. There is nothing clean about this. He sighed, a sound of pure exasperation. I knew you'd be emotional. Look, it's for the best. You'll see that eventually. I've left you the house. The equity should be enough to get you started somewhere else. The house. He'd left me the house. The generosity of it was so insulting it made me laugh, a short, bitter sound. The house you can't afford? The house whose mortgage is probably about to go into default because of all your secret debts? There was a pause on the other end of the line. What are you talking about? The credit card statement, Mark. I found it. The payments to something called Vance Development Group. What is that? Who are they? His voice turned to ice. You had no right to go through my things. That's my private business, Chloe. It has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with me. I was shouting now, my voice cracking. I'm pregnant, Mark. The words tumbled out before I could stop them, raw and desperate. I hadn't planned to tell him like this, over the phone, in a storm of anger and betrayal. The silence on the other end was absolute, so profound I thought he might have hung up. Pregnant? He finally said, his voice a strangled whisper. It wasn't the reaction I had dreamed of. There was no joy, no shock, just a cold, calculating dread. Are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. I have the ultrasound photo to prove it. I was going to tell you the night you left. He was quiet for another long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different. It was the voice of his mother, cold, pragmatic, and utterly devoid of emotion. That complicates things, he said, but it doesn't change them. My decision is final. And with that, he hung up. I stared at the phone, the dead silence buzzing in my ear. He knew. He knew about our baby, and it didn't matter. Whatever he was running to was more important than the child we had created. The last shred of the man I thought I knew disintegrated in that moment, leaving only the cold, hard truth of the stranger he had become. The dial tone echoed in my ear, a final, definitive sound that severed the last thread of hope I didn't even know I was still clinging to. He knew about the baby, and his only response was, "That complicates things," not, "I'm coming back," not, "We'll figure this out." Just a cold, logistical assessment. My grief, which had been a wild, thrashing storm, began to crystallize into something else, a sharp, clear, and unyielding resolve. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a mother, and I would not let my child's future be dictated by the secrets of a man who had abandoned us. I turned to Sarah, my face set. He's not just in debt, he's hiding something big. Vance Development Group. He panicked when I said the name. Sarah nodded, her laptop already open on her coffee table. Let's find out what it is. That night, after Sarah went to bed, I finally opened the leather-bound journal I'd taken from Mark's desk. I felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly overshadowed by the need for answers. The first half of the journal was filled with what I expected: sketches of buildings, notes on projects, old memories. Expected. But as I flipped toward the more recent entries, the tone shifted. The neat architectural script grew frantic, spidery. The entries were filled with references to Eleanor's plan and the Vance deal. Then I found it. An entry from 2 months ago. Eleanor says the Vance merger is our only way out. Dad's investments completely failed. The business is going to collapse unless we secure this. But Mr. Vance is old-fashioned. He only wants to do business with family. He wants me to marry Isabella Vance, the daughter of the man who owned Vance Development Group. My blood ran cold. The journal continued, a horrifying confession of a plan I was never meant to discover. Eleanor says Chloe is a loose end, a complication. She says a clean break is the only way. Sell what we can, pay off the immediate creditors, and disappear until the merger is signed. She says it's not personal, it's survival. But how is this not personal? How do I just erase her? He hadn't left me. He had been instructed to erase me and our baby. It was a business transaction, and we were the liability that needed to be written off the books. I felt a wave of nausea so profound it had nothing to do with the pregnancy. I ran to the bathroom, my hand clasped over my mouth, the journal clutched in my other hand like a piece of evidence. This wasn't just a man in debt running from his responsibilities. This was a calculated, cold-blooded plot, orchestrated by his mother to save their family's fortune at the expense of mine. The next morning, I showed Sarah the journal. Her face was a mask of fury as she read the entries. "They're trying to sell you, Mark, to save their company," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "And they were going to leave you pregnant with nothing." She immediately started digging online. Vance Development Group was a massive commercial real estate firm. A quick search revealed that their patriarch, Richard Vance, was a notoriously ruthless but family-oriented businessman. There were articles about his daughter, Isabella, a socialite recently single, smiling from the pages of society magazines. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. "They're not just going to get away with this," I said, my voice low and steady. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, protective fire. "Eleanor thinks she can just discard me, discard our child, like we're some line item on a balance sheet, but she doesn't know who she's dealing with." Sarah looked at me, a slow smile spreading across her face. "There's the Chloe I know," she said. "So what's the plan?" I picked up the journal and the credit card statement, laying them side by side on the table. "The plan," I said, "is to show Mr. Richard Vance exactly what kind of family he's about to merge with." Finding Richard Vance was easier than I expected. He was a creature of habit, and his habits were well documented in the business section of the local paper. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning, he had breakfast at the Gilded Spoon, an old-school diner downtown known for its discreet booths and powerful clientele. It was the kind of place where billion-dollar deals were sketched on napkins. I knew I couldn't just walk in and confront him. I needed a strategy, a way to get his attention without him immediately dismissing me as some crazed woman. I had one advantage. He didn't know what I looked like. The next Tuesday, I sat in a booth near the back of the diner, nursing a cup of tea, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. I had photocopied the most damning pages from Mark's journal and the credit card statement, placing them in a crisp manila envelope that now sat in my lap. At exactly 8:15 a.m., Richard Vance walked in. He was an imposing man in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He was seated in the booth directly across from mine. He ordered black coffee and the morning paper, disappearing behind it like a king behind his castle walls. My hands were shaking, but I took a deep breath, stood up, and walked over to his table. "Mr. Vance?" I said, my voice steadier than I felt. His table. He lowered his paper, his gaze sharp and questioning. "I'm sorry to interrupt your breakfast. My name is Chloe, and I believe we have a mutual acquaintance, Mark Hamilton." His expression didn't change, but a flicker of interest sparked in his eyes. "Do we?" he said, his voice a low rumble. "I have some information I think you'll find very relevant to your upcoming business merger with his family." I slid the manila envelope across the table. "I think you should read this. It concerns your daughter, Isabella." He looked from the envelope to my face, his eyes narrowing. For a moment, I thought he would call security, have me thrown out. But instead, he picked it up. He opened it slowly, his gaze scanning the first page, a copy of the journal entry where Mark detailed Eleanor's plan to have him marry Isabella to save the family business. I watched his face as he read. The stony, impassive mask began to crack. His jaw tightened. His knuckles went white as he gripped the papers. He flipped to the next page, the credit card statement showing the payments to his own company's Shell LLC. Then he saw the final page I'd included, a clear, high-resolution copy of my 6-week ultrasound with the date clearly visible. He looked up from the papers, and the polite disinterest was gone. His eyes were blazing with a cold, contained fury. "Who are you?" he asked again. But this time, it wasn't a dismissal. It was a demand. "I'm Mark's wife," I said softly, "and I'm the mother of his unborn child. The child his mother, Eleanor, called a complication that needed to be erased before he could marry your daughter." Richard Vance leaned back in his booth, the papers still clutched in his hand. The silence stretched for a long, heavy moment. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at the photo of a tiny, flickering life that had almost been sacrificed for his money. He finally folded the papers, slid them back into the envelope, and placed it on the table. He looked me straight in the eye. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Mrs. Hamilton," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "I assure you this merger is no longer on the table, and I believe the Hamilton family is about to have a very, very difficult day." He didn't offer sympathy or condolences. He offered something better. Consequences. As I walked out of the diner and into the morning sun, I felt the ground beneath my feet for the first time in weeks. I hadn't just exposed a secret. I had reclaimed my story. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. I didn't have to do anything else. Richard Vance, a man whose influence was woven into the very fabric of the city's financial world, moved with the quiet efficiency of a predator. By that afternoon, news of the indefinitely postponed Vance-Hamilton merger was the lead story on every local business wire. The carefully constructed empire Eleanor had been trying to salvage with my life began to crumble like a sandcastle in a hurricane. Creditors who had been held at bay by the promise of the Vance bailout started calling in their debts. The Hamilton family's name, once synonymous with old money and respectability, was now whispered in tones of scandal and ruin. Sarah followed the news with a grim satisfaction, reading me snippets from articles and online forums. Sources close to Vance say the deal was called off due to ethical concerns regarding the Hamiltons' business practices. She read aloud, a smirk playing on her lips. Ethical concerns. That's a polite way of saying they tried to sell their son and get rid of his pregnant wife. I didn't feel triumphant, not exactly. I felt a quiet, profound sense of justice, as if a great weight had been lifted, not just from my shoulders, but from the world itself. A week later, I received a package by courier. It was a thick, elegant envelope with the Vance Development Group's insignia embossed in gold. Elegant envelope. Inside was a personal check made out to me for a staggering amount, enough to buy my little bungalow outright and set up a trust for my child with plenty to spare. Tucked alongside it was a handwritten note from Richard Vance. This is not charity. This is restitution. No one should have to pay the price for my family's name being used in such a manner. I have also taken the liberty of ensuring the Hamiltons' remaining assets are frozen, pending a full investigation into their fraudulent activities. Your husband will be hearing from my lawyers. Raise your child well, Mrs. Hamilton. They deserve a better world. I sat on Sarah's couch, staring at the check, my mind reeling. This was more than I could have ever imagined. It was security. It was freedom. It was a future handed back to me by the one man I thought would be my enemy. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since I'd left my house. I drove by it. I parked across the street, watching from the safety of my car. The lights were on. Through the living room window, I could see them. Eleanor, pacing back and forth like a caged animal, her face a mask of rage and disbelief. Mark sat slumped on the couch, head in his hands, a ghost in the life he had tried to build on lies. They looked small, pathetic, trapped in the consequences of their own making. I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel anger. I just felt done. I started the car and drove away without looking back. That night, I called a real estate agent. I listed the house for sale the next morning. I didn't want it anymore. It wasn't a home, it was a crime scene, filled with memories that had been retroactively poisoned. I also hired a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Evelyn Reed. I showed her the journal, the notes, the check from Vance. We're not just filing for divorce, Evelyn said, a predatory gleam in her eye. We're filing for damages, for emotional distress, fraud, and endangerment. By the time we're done, he won't have a penny to his name that you don't approve of. For the first time, I smiled a real, genuine smile. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was fighting back, and I was going to win. The divorce proceedings were less of a battle and more of a surrender. Faced with the evidence from Mark's own journal, the testimony of Richard Vance's legal team, and the threat of a public fraud lawsuit, the Hamiltons had no ground to stand on. Mark signed everything Evelyn put in front of him without a fight. He relinquished all rights to any assets, agreed to a generous child support arrangement that would be managed by a third-party trust, and consented to a permanent restraining order that kept both him and his mother a minimum of 500 feet from me and our child. The last time I saw him was in Evelyn's sterile conference room. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a deep, weary shame. He tried to speak to me once, as we were signing the final papers. "Chloe, he began, his voice hoarse. Evelyn cut him off without even looking up from her papers. "Address your comments to me, Mr. Hamilton. You have lost the privilege of speaking directly to my client." He flinched, looked down at his hands, and said nothing more. Eleanor wasn't there. According to the news, she was now embroiled in a series of lawsuits from creditors, and had become a social pariah. Her plan had not just failed, it had spectacularly backfired, consuming everything she had schemed to protect. With the settlement from Vance and the sale of the house, I bought a small sunny cottage in a quiet neighborhood on the other side of the city. It had a garden in the back and a room with big windows that was perfect for a nursery. Sarah helped me paint it, this time in a soft, gentle green. We filled it with new things, things that had no history, no ghosts. A new crib, a new rocking chair, and a mobile of smiling, hand-felted animals that I hung myself. Rocking chair. There was no fear in this room, only hope. My daughter, Lily, was born in the early spring, on a day when the rain finally broke and the sun streamed through the hospital window. She was small and perfect, with a tuft of dark hair like her father's and my eyes. Holding her for the first time, I felt a love so fierce and protective it took my breath away. This was what mattered. This was why I fought. Life settled into a new rhythm, one of quiet joy and peaceful exhaustion. There were late-night feedings, endless diaper changes, and the sweet, milky scent of a newborn. Sarah was a constant presence, a surrogate aunt who spoiled Lily rotten. My parents, who were horrified when I finally told them the whole story, showered me with support and love, trying to make up for the years I had felt so alone in my own family. One afternoon, about 6 months after Lily was born, a letter arrived. It was from Mark. It wasn't sent to my house. He didn't have the address, but forwarded through Evelyn's office. I hesitated, then opened it. It was a long, rambling apology, filled with self-loathing and regret. He wrote about the therapy he was in, about understanding the generational trauma and emotional abuse his mother had inflicted on him, turning him into a man he didn't recognize. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't ask to see Lily. He just wanted me to know that he was trying to become a better person, and that he hoped, one day, our daughter would not have to carry the burden of his mistakes. He ended the letter with a single line. I hope she has your strength. You were always the strongest person I knew, and I was too weak to deserve you. I folded the letter and put it away in a box. It didn't change anything, but it closed a door I hadn't realized was still open. He was on his own path now, and I was on mine. Later that day, I sat in the rocking chair in Lily's nursery, holding her small, sleeping form against my chest. The sun streamed through the window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. I looked around the room, at the soft green walls, the smiling felted animals, and my beautiful, peaceful daughter. I hadn't just survived. I had rebuilt. I had created a world from the ashes of another, a world filled with light and love and safety. And in the quiet of that afternoon, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that we were going to be just fine.